Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as I walk you through some Delica Chevron Peyote. I'm going to show you how to make some strips, how to attach them together at the end, and how if you want to sew them together in the center, you can do so. So it's kind of a how-to video on creating Delica Chevron Peyote. If you need any materials, go ahead and look below the video. We'll link to everything, or you can get them out of your advent calendar. Remember also, if you need to gather the supplies, like I said, check out that links and also comment below the video. Gather everything up and let's get ready to get started. So we're going to go over how to start your chevron pattern, and we're just doing a 2-color chevron pattern, which you can see you can play with matted and bright. And you can make all different peyote strips for this bookmark. That's what's really fun. You can kind of use up some beads, make it seasonal in color, up to you. And if you are a Advent person, this is a little hint. All right, so we are going in here and we are putting a stop bead on the end of our thread. You want about 5 feet of thread for the design because your thread is going to basically be tripled almost through each bead. So you'll need triple the length plus a little bit extra. The first thing we are going to do is create our first block of our peyote, which we are going to do as 8 beads wide. I find that 8 beads are a really good distance, so that way it's this nice little kind of strip that you can make into a bracelet if you want to, and it's a great size. So once you have 8 beads on, and you're doing 8 beads just in your first color, once those 8 beads are on, we're going to pick up the second color. I'm going to pick up this maroon, and I'm going to skip over bead number 1 and sew through bead number 2. Going backwards. So actually skip over 8, sew through 7. Give a nice tight pull. And this is the first stitch that is, I think, this is the most difficult one because you kind of have to make those seed beads sit exactly the way that you want it to. Give a nice tight pull, make those last 2 beads sit one on top of the other. Once you get that, good to go. From here, you're going to continue with that peyote stitch. Add a bead, skip over the even number, sew through the odd. So you're skipping 6, sewing through 5. And we're back to that first color. So I only have 1 bead right now in that alternate color to get the chevron. Again, add a bead, skip over bead number 3 and go through bead number, skip over bead number 4, go through bead number 3, skip over bead number 2, and sew through bead number 1 after adding a bead. We have lots of videos on these basics of peyote stitch as well. So we will put those in the comments for you. From here, then, we're going back the other way, and we're going to continue with our first original color. Once you get your first start of your V, it becomes really, really easy. Add a bead, go through the next bead that's sticking up. Add a bead then. Oops, that one just wants to sit on the side. If you notice that your thread is a little twisted, it wants to sit on the side, try to fix that before you get too far in, because sometimes that'll make a little bump in your pattern. From here then, add a bead, sew through. And as you're getting ready to go into that last bead, what I want you to do is I want you to pick up the alternate color because we're trying to make this into triangle. Now you're sewing out the end here. You have that alternate color on, and guess what? The alternate color is the one that you pick up as well. Sewing back down the line here, you're going in, and you'll notice, hey, I want to keep that V in line. I want to keep that diagonal stitch. So you know you're also grabbing another one of that same color and sewing in, because that's keeping that line. So you kind of draw in your mind that you're saying, okay, I've got that red line. I want to keep that burgundy line going. Adding a bead, sewing through the next one, going up now, adding a bead, sewing towards the exterior. Now, naturally, what's happening with this chevron pattern is as you're sewing one direction, creating the triangle going up, you're actually creating the triangle going down on this other side. So again, that red one goes on, coming down. Red bead goes on, because each pass you're doing, you're going to add 4 beads. And as you get into the design, you're going to right away notice and say, oh yeah, I want to keep that burgundy line going, so I know I have a burgundy bead to add. Excuse me. Add a bead, then burgundy bead, coming down through, and I add that bead. Once again, now I'm basically to every 2 beads are getting added a burgundy bead. And you can see that triangle still starting to take place. Burgundy bead. And then you say, do I need a burgundy bead? If I put a red one here, you'll notice, oh, it stops my triangle. So that's where you can take that off and put that on. If you're ever in doubt, just put the bead on, kind of hold it there and say, yep, I'm ready to go with my triangle. Then here you're saying, oh, not that brown bead yet. I know I still need to do the red. So progressively we put on 1 brown bead. Then we did a row where we put on 2 brown beads. And we did a row where we put on 3 brown beads. I have that nice diagonal line is finished now. In the red, you can see, hey, that's finished. That line is as triangle as it's going to get. So now you know as you're coming back down here, you do 1 up with 3, 1 down with 3 of the burgundy. So I sewed up and I added 3 burgundies and 1 red. I'm sewing down and I'm adding 1 red and 3 burgundies. Now, as I sew up for this row, I'm going to do 4 burgundies. There's 1, 2, going through, and 3. And you say, hey, if I add a red here, what's going to happen? It stops that triangle short. So you know you need to add the burgundy as you come on up. Burgundy's there. And guess what? We want to finish that diagonal line. So you know I've done 2 rows where I did 3 burgundies and then I just did 4 burgundies. Guess what? We do another row where we add 4 burgundy. So that's kind of your pattern. You're going up adding 4, you're coming down adding 4. And you've got that peak now in your triangle. And you're only ever going to have 1 top bead in the color for your triangle because it needs to peak. Coming down then, I'm going to start that downgrade. So there's my brown. There's my brown. Another brown, so you can still see that triangle starting to take place. And then 1 more brown. Because look, hey, it's that pyramid. You'll notice in the triangles too, when you get into them, you'll see the triangles are 1 bead, then 2 bead, then 3 bead, then 4, 5. So if you're looking at it from the side, you can also see that direction here. So here I have my diagonal. And you'll notice if I do another one here, I'll have 2 at the top. I never want 2 at the top. So right away, you're like, hey, it's time to add a red. And now we start downgrading. 1 red, 3 browns. And that gets us to the bottom of this row. As we go up, we're going to do the same. 1, 2, 3 browns and a red. So you're starting to increase and decrease that pattern, getting that nice point there. And as you come down then on the design, you're going to increase the color that you do and then decrease the color that you do to get that nice triangle. Once you get to the end of the triangle here, you'll notice that the other triangle is starting to get formed. As you come down the design, a couple different stitches, I've done 2 reds, 2 browns, then up 2 browns, 2 reds, then coming down 3 reds, 1 brown, going back up 1 brown, finishing off that triangle. See, look, now that triangle and that nice line is done. 3 reds as this next point of the chevron comes to an end. Then I basically hit that reset button. So now we're resetting where we finished one of our triangles, and now we're going to go down on the stitch and we're going to do 3 reds. So we've slowly been increasing every 2 rows our red count and decreasing our brown count. Here I am at the top with my 1 point of red. Ready? I'm going to put that red in, and we get to the going back. That is my 1 point of red. pour out more reds, we go up to red, and then we'll slowly start from the red to get to the brown. You can see once you progress how nicely that chevron pattern happens. So we are right here on the start of the design, and we're going to keep going. You can see it laid over. And then as we go through and do the next row, we'll add a brown in and come back on the design. So you can have fun creating all of these different chevron strips, making them as long as you want, basically for the bookmark. If you're doing the chevron, you're going to have an equal amount of both colors because you have the same count that you're using starting and stopping on the piece. Now, what happens if you want to sew these pieces all together, as well as how are you going to end them? You can do some fringe, you can do some fancy stuff, but I'm going to show you a really quick way to whip stitch these together to make it a little bit wider like we're looking at, where it almost looks seamless. And then we're going to go up the ends and the top with some 15-0 seed beads. The next thing to do if you want to is to add all these peyote strips together. You can do it as a bookmark, as a bracelet. I'm going to show you how we get that done. I have some 15-0s here to join them together, and then I'll show you how we are going to actually stitch them together as we're going in and working on the design. So I've added a little bit of thread here and then just tied the two threads together, burned off the one. And I'm going to come back down the pattern, going in and adding 15s in between the last row of peyote. What this does is it kind of draws the project together. Also, because the 15s are smaller than the 11-0 seed beads, they're going to sit more recessed than the last row. So I have this row here, and I'll show you also how the bookmark will look, and you can decide kind of how to take it from there. As you're going through and coming out the last section of your bookmark here, what you want to do is line up the next one so that way you know that you are going to have a little section where it has the 15-0 space. So here I'm going to line it up right here, bead next to bead, 15-0 goes on, and I sew through my next line of my peyote stitch. That's connecting the edges. 15 on, connect through. And what you'll start to see is from one side to the other, that you can't really tell where one piece of peyote begins and where one piece ends. So after here, we're going to put, so see how right away they kind of sit right next to one another. 15 goes on. I'm going to flip this red peyote over and sew through the next bead. And again, they just kind of line up like a seamless line there. Sew through. And what I'm going to do to reinforce this even a little bit more is I'm going to do a second row of my 15s just for some silver along the side. Now you'll notice, and you're probably already thinking, well, if we do the sides, the right and the left side here, these sections are going to be open in the middle. Correct. They're going to be open in the middle. It's just kind of a fun design, but I will also show you how to close them up in case you want to do that. But coming down on the design now that we're lined up and even, we're going to add a 15, turning our thread back and sew through the 15 that's already there. Add a 15, sew through. So I'm going to continue down the whole project, linking these together just a little bit more by sewing down through that last row of our peyote stitch. I've also seen these look really cute. You can take some old leather or material and actually fold it over the end. Some ultra suede. And see how that just creates that nice seamless line. When we come down to the end, if you want to, you can simply tie the thread off, weave it down through the peyote to get to the other side, and finish off your thread end. So here I am where it's all connected, basically lined up. They look great as a unit. It lays nice and flat, lining them up. And what I'm going to do, because I still have some thread ends here, is I'm going to sew back through the peyote, wiggling back through, and just tie off my thread ends as I get there and finish off the thread. Next, we'll go down to the opposite side and do the exact same thing. Just to show those connection points and getting rid of the thread ends, I already did it here, but I'm getting my thread end right at the end of the previous row, which is right where the thread starts that was used for the red section. I'm going to tie the two thread ends together. Burn down the black thread and continue with the gray thread further into the design. So now the black thread is done. I'll burn that down. But what I'm going to do is come over basically into that side of the peyote stitch and take my needle and thread through that peyote stitch. So I was on the gray, I tied my knot, I'm going into that peyote stitch, and that pulls that knot into the interior of the design. Grab my thread burner here, burn that thread end very close to the project. And you can see I did the same thing kind of right there. Go through and burn it down close. And there you have it. I'm going to then stitch this thread through the project a couple times, and I'm going to flip over and do the exact same thing with my 15 O's on the opposite side of the project. I'm finished with both sides of my bookmark, and I'm going to keep it fun that it's separated basically and just together at the end. If you want to turn it into a bracelet, this is a great time that you can actually stitch on grab a Potomac's long oval clasp and stitch that on. That would look cool. But if you do want to take the bracelet and stitch, or take the bookmark, take the bracelet, whatever you're using for it, and stitch it together, you can do that. So that way you don't have it free floating, although I think that's part of the fun of it. To do so, what you're going to do is basically go to the connection point and you're going to sew between the peyote stitch. So my thread is currently coming out of that last row of the beige. I'm going to sew into the next bead back, which is going to be the next beige bead. From here, I'm going to sew over through the red bead that sits on the opposite side. Back through the next red bead down, so you're reversing the thread. Stitching that together. Then I'm going to go over, see where it lines up, go through the next beige bead. So you're basically just sewing on a zigzag or on an angle and going back through here. I'm going through my next gray bead. So you sew onto one side and then sew through the other. And you can see that will get that combined there where you can't even tell that the two are separate in their peyote stitches. I'm going to burn mine down here and just use that as a nice area where it connected, and I want that separation look to be good for my bookmark. Thanks so much for joining me in creating these Delica chevron strips, creating the bookmark. Remember, there's so much variety that can be done, making this into a wrap bracelet, make it into a fun bracelet, putting ends on the bookmark, or simply getting in that reading style, warming yourself next to the fire, and putting this into your book. As always, if you do any sort of modifications, go ahead and comment below and help out other Potomac beaders that may be watching. Also, if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for joining me. Have fun creating if you're an advent calendar, and gather up some Delicas.